Pizza. We all know what it is, and if you're subscribed, you know that I've already done a video on it. Well, I made another one. In my first pizza video, it had bad video quality, bad audio quality. It was too long, my voiceover didn't coordinate with the actual video, and in general, it was a mess. And despite all this, I was not planning to redo it until now. One of my good friends came from Malaysia to go to college here in California, and when I went to visit him, I found the absolute coolest thing in his backyard, an honest-to-God pizza oven. This is the first time I've ever been offered to make a pizza in somebody's pizza oven, and I had to make a video about it. And to be honest, it'll be nice to fix up some of the old videos. One of the many mistakes I made in that video was not taking enough time to really talk about each ingredient. Individual ingredients, especially in pizza, can make a massive difference in the end product, and the first thing I wanted to address was salt. In New York, the salt is simply mixed into the flour, while in Naples, the salt is dissolved into the water, and there are two sides to this argument about salt. One says that salt will kill yeast, so we should always keep them apart, and the other says that salt takes a while to kill yeast, so there's no need. And I side with the second argument more, but I think that it doesn't hurt to take the precaution, because we all know that salt is capable of killing yeast. The addition of sugar to pizza dough is not a Neapolitan thing, but I think it's used almost everywhere else. Naples tends to be strict when it comes to traditional Neapolitan pizza, and I guess adding sugar is not traditional at all. But to be fully honest, I don't think sugar does make a huge difference. From what I've read in several articles that I will link in the description, sugar helps pizza dough brown in the oven. That's probably true, but I don't think it helps make New York pizza any better than Neapolitan style pizza. But just because it does make your pizza dough better doesn't mean you shouldn't use it. You see, sugar makes breading so much easier because yeast feeds on sugar. Your dough will rise faster, and if you're blooming the yeast, the blooming will be much more exaggerated, making it easier for you to tell if your yeast is alive. Yeast is not something to be intimidated by, unlike sourdough starter, which I am personally terrified of. And although yeast is nothing to be afraid of, you also shouldn't have to overestimate your abilities when it comes to handling it. I myself have killed my yeast because of overmixing and letting it mingle with salt for too long. But if you learn the necessary rules like what temperature you should be at, you should for the most part be fine. Another thing I want to add was I'm using instant yeast because I prefer to active dry. It makes dough rise faster, which makes me less worried as to whether or not my yeast was alive. But active dry is also completely fine. And now for what is, in my opinion, one of the biggest differences between Neapolitan style pizza and New York style pizza is oil, preferably olive oil. I don't know why Naples doesn't use oil in the actual dough. They use monstrous amounts to keep it from sticking. They drizzle it with olive oil several times before putting it in the oven, and they drizzle it again after taking it out of the oven for good measure. Olive oil tastes delicious, and in my opinion, you definitely should put oil in the actual pizza dough. And I think that the texture of New York style pizza is superior to Neapolitan just because of the addition of olive oil. And for the ingredient that makes up most of the dough, flour. I have two different types of flours, both can be found at any grocery store chain. The one on the right is what you're probably more familiar with, all-purpose flour. All-purpose flour does live up to its name, it can work for all purposes of baking, but when it comes to bread, it doesn't do the best job. The flour on my left is called bread flour, and although its only job is making bread, it does it exquisitely. Bread flour has a higher amount of something called gluten. Gluten is what makes your bread airy, chewy, and fluffy. And all-purpose flour doesn't even have close to the amount of gluten bread flour does. So if you want the best pizza, definitely use bread flour. If you don't have it on hand, you can still make a pizza with no problem at all. We are now going to bloom the yeast, the process I talked about earlier. All you have to do is mix 1 teaspoon of yeast with 2 teaspoons of sugar and half a cup of lukewarm water. As I said earlier, sugar really exaggerates the results of the brewing process, so it'll be much easier to know whether or not your yeast is alive. I already knew mine was alive because I bought it the week before filming this, but I'm doing this just for you guys. A side note, make sure the water is about 90 to 110 degrees Fahrenheit. Any hotter and it will kill your yeast. Leave your yeast mixture to the side, and in a separate bowl combine 2 cups of room temperature water with 2 teaspoons of salt. As I said earlier, I will be dissolving the salt just to make sure it does not kill my yeast. Make sure to mix it thoroughly until it is completely dissolved. Once you're completely sure the salt is completely dissolved, mix in 7 tablespoons of olive oil. I know you can actually mix water and oil together, but when I didn't mix it at all, I noticed that oil clumps tend to form in the dough, and it's really hard to get rid of them. 2 minutes will suffice. It is now that I add the bread flour that I was talking about earlier, about 7 cups in total, and because it's a lot of flour, I always add it in 3 batches, and I always thoroughly mix in the first batch before I mix in the next one. It's now that I'm going to be adding the yeast mixture. As you can see, it's gotten frothy on top, which is a sign that your yeast is alive and well. I felt like I should have added more flour in the second batch because the third batch had a lot of flour and it was hard to knead into the dough, but in the end it came together beautifully. Once a shaggy dough formed, I started kneading inside the bowl. Having a really wide bowl is useful for this very reason. If the bowl was too narrow, it would have been a pain to knead. This helps me contain the mess and make cleaning a lot easier. There will be a point where the dough will completely disappear into the dough and the dough will get too sticky to work with, and there was a time where I would add more flour at this point. But I've learned that it makes so much more sense to let the dough rise instead. Rising the dough makes it easier to work with and it also gives me time to clean up. As you can see, there are ingredients all over my countertops as well as close to a dozen dishes in my sink that I had to wash. Doing this makes the pizza making process a million times easier. Whenever I'm done cleaning, I can get back to my pizza dough. Well, now that my kitchen's clean, I can get back to the dough. As soon as you pour the dough onto your work surface, you will now notice how much easier it is to work with. It barely sticks to the countertop as well as your hands, and this is because you let the dough relax. And when it comes to kneading, just go for it. There are so many ways to knead, and it doesn't really matter which kind you pick. To see if your dough is ready, you're going to have to perform the complicated window pane test, which involves you cutting off a chunk of dough and seeing if you can get it so thin you can see light through it. If the dough rips too early, it means that you have to keep kneading. In my case, the dough was clearly completely fine. So, now fold all the corners of the dough into itself and fold it into a round sphere. This part is incredibly satisfying. Enjoy the moment. Because my pizza peel is somewhat small, I'll be dividing the dough into 6 pieces, and to do that, I just weighed the dough and divided it by 6, but you can just eye it and cut it into 6 pieces. I'm weighing each piece to make sure they're all the same size, about 290 grams. Once you have the desired amount of doughs, you'll need to shape each one to make sure they rise correctly. I personally just fold in the corners, then roll it around. You can also put it in between your thumb and pointer finger and pinch the bottom, but this method is a little faster. Once you have all your doughs shaped and ready to go, oil a container that's large enough to hold all of them. I used to rise the dough without dividing, then divided the day I made the pizza. I found this method more effective. Just use enough olive oil to coat the whole box, then use a dough to spread it around. Make sure each dough gets enough oil so that they don't dry out while rising. I'll be doing an overnight rise which will maximize flavor and make the dough more crispy and chewy. Well, it's the next day, and it's time to make a pizza sauce. The sauce is, in my opinion, tied with the crust on the most important list. The best of the best sauce can only be made with the best of the best tomatoes. And those tomatoes are San Marzano. They're at almost every grocery store chain, and when buying one, make sure it says whole and peeled tomato. As soon as I open it, you can see that there is a ton of liquid. You can remove it if you want, but if you do, you're going to need to use 2 cans. I've never done that before. I make the sauce with everything in the can, and it always comes out delicious. I personally don't see the need to spend extra time and money. Now get a saucepan over medium heat and throw in your tomatoes. I immediately start seasoning, and of course the first seasoning is salt. Be conservative with salt. You can add more, but you cannot take any out. I added about a tablespoon of salt, several cranks of black pepper. It's preferably freshly ground black pepper. You could use pre-ground. A tablespoon of granulated garlic, but you could just use garlic powder. A few sprinkles of onion powder, as well as Italian seasoning. And to finish it off, I added in some cayenne pepper just for a little bit of heat. I also added some fresh oregano, put a little less than me. I think the sauce was the teeniest but strong. And this is my preferred method of crushing tomatoes, a potato masher. I used to blend them with my immersion blender before cooking, and that worked out great, but I've been loving the tomato chunks, and it's because of this masher that I had to add a half can more tomatoes. When you use an immersion blender, it gives you more sauce than the masher. Using this forces me to put in a little more, but I honestly think it's super worth it. Once all this is mashed up, I put the heat on high. A lot of people don't cook their tomato sauce, and in my last video I didn't either, but we had a side-by-side comparison and the cooked sauce was far superior. Cooking brings extra flavor. As long as they don't go overboard, that flavor is welcome. Another thing to keep in mind is to never blend your sauce after you've cooked it. I see so many YouTubers do this and they all wonder as to why their sauce is ugly. Either blend it before or do not blend it at all. Make sure to remove the oregano as well as any other tomato fibers that you may find inside the sauce. And And after about 5 minutes on high heat, the sauce is done. You can see that the sauce is a beautiful deep ruby red. If you melted it after cooking it, it would look nothing like this, trust me. I'm going to be pouring this into a plastic container. The sauce becomes a little thicker in the fridge, making it easier for me to spread. So it's going to go in there while I shred the cheese. Speaking of cheese, if you want New York style pizza, you absolutely must use low moisture, whole milk mozzarella. My favorite company is Galbani, and they carry it at my local Safeway. I don't know if you can just see how hard this cheese is. It's like a big block of rubber, and it's incredibly hard to cut through. A lot of people make the mistake of using fresh mozzarella and putting the same amount as low moisture mozzarella. The thing is, fresh mozzarella has a ton of whey, which will make your pizza soupy. And if you want fresh mozzarella, cut it into small pieces and throw them into random corners of the pizza. You'll need exactly 28 ounces of cheese, but that's impossible to get, so I ended up shredding 32 ounces of cheese. They only come in 16-ounce packets, but that is fine. Now that I'm done shredding, I'm going to put these in the container and into the fridge. Putting them in the fridge is important because it keeps any extra grease from oozing out inside the oven. Now, I did end up making pizza in my friend's pizza oven, but I won't be spending too much time on that. The pizza oven was fun and it was great to use, but I'm a home cook just like you, and a home cook does not usually have access to a pizza oven. Now, the first thing I'm going to address here is your oven and my oven. My oven can't go over 550 degrees Fahrenheit. If you're not from the US, don't be lazy and research the conversion on Google. Anyways, give your oven to the highest temperature it can possibly go, and you're also going to need something like a pizza stone. In my case, an absolutely massive cast iron pan. You basically want to heat up the cast iron to its max so it can give the pizza an amazing bottom crust. As you can see here, I have the stone heating for a full hour. No ifs and buts about it. The stone needs enough time to retain all the heat. If you open the oven a lot, the heat will escape, which is definitely not something you want. Now onto the actual pizza. Here I have some flour, my sauce, my cheese, some Parmesan, and on my right, my pizza peel. Flour your work surface a bit and flour the top of your dough, and make sure to not immediately deflate the dough. I see a lot of people do this and they wonder why it's so impossibly hard to stretch it. Use all that airiness to your advantage. First, I use my fingers to kind of stretch it out. I also rotated the dough between my hands, and I tossed it a little bit too. Once it's at the point where the dough is resisting your hands, I always use a rolling pin. This allows me to get the pizza just a little bit thinner and bigger. I'm trying to feed 5 people with this pizza. And as soon as it's ready to go, flour your peel heavily. If you do not flour it enough, it is going to stick. Put on the dough, sauce it evenly, making sure you do not put too much. On goes some Parmesan for a little extra flavor. And for the mozz, make sure you don't put too much. It should have enough room to spread evenly. The clock is ticking. The dough could stick any second, so you have to be really quick about this. As soon as it's ready to go, shimmy the pizza out onto the cast iron pan, being careful not to burn your hands, because I've done it before and it hurts a lot. Once the cheese has some nice light brown spots and the crust is golden and has risen, you can use some tongs to take out the pizza. I like to always rest it on a cooling rack for 5 minutes to let the crust relax and to keep the pizza from getting steamed and soggy. Once that's over with, you can dig in and howl in triumph because you literally just spent 48 hours on a pizza. And if you did it all right and you followed my directions, it should be a pretty damn good one at that.